Hello, welcome once again to Christ the Healer. And we are talking about God helping us with the knowledge that is out there to discover how we've been violating His natural laws and things we can do to correct that. Once we have knowledge and we repent, and He just begins to show us and grace us and strengthen us to make the changes that we need to make. We began to give you some statistics last time, and we want to continue today talking about heart disease. Heart disease is the most pervasive killer in America today. It's our number one killer. It will kill 1 out of every 3 Americans. Over 60 million Americans currently suffer from some form of cardiovascular disease. That includes high blood pressure, stroke, and heart disease. It can be prevented totally and even reversed, they have now shown, by a healthy diet. We could collectively defeat the most dangerous disease in this country, and instead of just confessing the scriptures and just saying, God, you fix it. I want to eat any way that I want to eat. I want to do and have habits that are contrary to your natural laws. But now that I've heard Debbie's Christ the Healer series, fix it for me. Well, he says, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to lead Debbie for herself and others into some other parts that have to do with this, like not continuing to violate my laws. Heart disease is the cause of 1 out of every 2 deaths in America. Over 1 million persons each year. The cost to the American people is over $7 billion annually. There is a man, I think I said in several sessions back, that I watched the Netflix video, but I believe you can probably even purchase the video, called Forks Over Knives. And also in the book, The China Study, I kept seeing 2 men's names a lot. One is a scientist. One was a top-notch surgeon, actually at the famous renowned Cleveland Clinic. And both of these men, one the scientist, one the surgeon, have received numerous awards in the top of their medical field. Both about the same age, I believe now in their late 70s, both raised on dairy farms in 2 different parts of the country, big meat eaters, big dairy eaters, thought that that's what we should eat for protein and for growing bones and teeth. Long story short, in their studies, the scientist, one the physician, they begin to see a correlation between all these major diseases and animal protein and a lot of dairy. And that brought the 2 of them together in different research projects and things. But one of them is Dr. Esselstyn. And he's the one who was the great surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic. He's the one that I mentioned a couple sessions back, took on like 18 or 20 of these terminal heart patients, got them all to change their diet. They're all still alive today, some running marathons. It's an incredible story. And he gives all kinds of stats, both on Forks Over Knives and in the China Study, about how that he is actually filmed on x-ray new arteries growing back when he gets people to reverse their diet. But it's amazing that once he started making these discoveries, both him and the scientists, that escapes my mind at the moment, but both of them that received all these awards and all their colleagues looked up to him, when they started to mention nutrition, people quit having anything to do with them. It was amazing. It's like, oh, we think you're the best surgeon in the country. Oh, you're going to mention nutrition? Oh, you're into that weird stuff. And he said he started finding that diet did so much beyond what his knife was able to do. He gave people major bypass surgeries, and he was the one everybody wanted to operate on them because he was so good. But he said he noticed they'd be back in there in 2 or 3 years if they had stents, whatever, with heart problems again. Because if you don't change how you've been violating God's natural laws, the disease keeps coming back on. Now, I'm going to give you some stats on cancer. The rates at which we die from cancer are among the highest in the world compared to all the other countries of the world. and it's been getting worse. Despite over 30 years of the massively funded war on cancer that President Nixon declared, it's gotten worse. We've made very little progress at all. Cancer is not a natural event. People are starting to think that's just what everybody's going to get when they get older. Adopting a healthy diet and lifestyle can prevent the majority of cancers in the United States. Old age can be and should be graceful and peaceful. It's been proven through experiments with animals. Oh, I wish I had time to get into this in detail. It's one of the most fascinating studies I've read about, again, both in Forks Over Knives and in the China study, where they actually discovered that cancer can be turned on and off totally through nutrition, despite very strong genetic predisposition to it. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like hearing this, neither did I. They found that animal fat and protein was the key in turning it on and off. They actually fed a bunch of rats some of the worst carcinogens that you can have that always cause cancer. Sure enough, it did in all of the rats, both test groups. When they got the rats up to heavier animal protein, the tumors took off, they all died. When they would bring it back down to 5% or less, I believe it was 5%, their tumors stopped and they started to get well. So then they'd start to give more animal protein again. It took off again. Then they decided to try a bunch of different things. They actually gave the ones that were on the least amount of animal protein the worst, more carcinogens, exposed them to more cancer. Still, they remain fine. They actually took the ones that they put on more animal protein and gave them less cancer-producing stuff. They still got cancer. They tried it so many ways, and every time it came up, they could turn it on, turn it off by how much animal protein they consumed. Very interesting. Eating healthy not only prevents disease, but also generates health and a sense of well-being physically and mentally. The average American consumes 15 to 16% protein at least. Many of us, I think it's more than that, but need only 10% or less. Actually, in these books, they said much less than that. But they said to be on the safe side, to satisfy some other people out there, they're going to say 10%. They found that plant protein does not promote cancer growth, even if you eat more than you need of that, even at higher levels of intake. It's the animal protein that causes it. They found that cancer is largely due to environmental lifestyle factors, not genetics. This is good news, my friend. They said it's really estimated that genetics only determine, ready for this, about 2 to 3% of the total cancer risk. We have heard so different than that. If your mom got it, if your grandma got it, you're going to get it. Well, you know why? Mostly because we do the same habits mama did and grandma did. We talked about that in an earlier one. But in the China study, and I wish I could tell you more about that study, but I want to encourage you to read about it for yourself, even though that of all my books gets pretty technical. But it is fascinating. They proved it over and over and over again that most of our diseases are ones of affluence, that where they eat almost all total vegetables and fruits, they get none of these things that we live with in our nation. In America, 15 to 16% of our total calories comes from protein. And upwards of 80% of this protein comes from animal-based foods. But in rural China, only 9 to 10% comes from protein, and only 10% of that from animal-based protein. But they found that in any of these countries, if they immigrate to the United States or they move into a larger city where they begin to eat like the Western world, they get the same rates we do. So it doesn't have to do with the color of their skin, doesn't have to do with hereditary events, doesn't have to do with their nationality, has to do with developing the same sad habits that we have in America. Diabetes. 1 out of 13 Americans now has it, and that continues to rise. It has ugly consequences like blindness, limb amputation, cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and of course, premature death. Both diabetes and obesity are merely symptoms of poor health in general. They rarely exist in isolation of other diseases, and the more I studied this, the more I found that interesting. A person doesn't just have diabetes, they have diabetes because there's other underlying factors going on. And then when they get the diabetes, it causes more underlying factors. It's often a forecast of a much deeper and more serious health problem, such as heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Diabetes complications. The person who has that is 2 to 4 times more likely to risk death from heart disease. The person who has diabetes is 2 to 4 times more likely to have a stroke. High blood pressure. Over 70% of people with diabetes have high blood pressure. They are connected. Blindness. Diabetes is the leading cause of blindness in adults. Kidney disease. It's the leading cause of end-stage kidney disease. Over 100,000 diabetics underwent dialysis or kidney transplantation in 1999. A nervous system disease. I found that interesting. 60 to 70% of diabetics suffer mild to severe nervous system damage. Amputation. Over 60% of all lower limb amputations occurs with diabetics. Dental disease. They have increased frequency and severity of gum disease that can lead to tooth loss. Pregnancy complications and other problems. Diabetes among people in their 30s has increased 70% in less than 10 years. Okay, now if that's something that is just genetic or people can't prevent it, why do we have 70% more of it in young people than we did 10 years ago? The percentage of obese people has nearly doubled in the past 30 years. This forecasts a health catastrophe in the coming decades that we can't even imagine. The term adult onset diabetes has become obsolete. They don't even like to say now it just suddenly comes on adults and we don't know why. Now they just call it type 2. This debilitating disease is reaching epidemic proportions among people of all ages, attacking children as young as 10. We're not talking about the childhood juvenile type 1 diabetes. We're talking about what used to happen to only adults starts to happen when children get up to 10 years of age because they too are eating all the wrong stuff. Drugs never treat the cause of the disease, so the diabetic faces a lifetime of drugs and medications just to try to calm down symptoms. This costs the United States over, are you ready for this one? $130 billion a year. But there is hope. The right diet not only prevents but also treats diabetes. Researchers have found that increased fat intake was associated with an increased rate of type 2 diabetes. Now, cholesterol. Cholesterol is an important indicator of disease risk. Animal foods correlated with increasing blood cholesterol. Plant-based foods are proven to be associated with decreasing levels of cholesterol. Saturated fat and dietary cholesterol also raise blood cholesterol. There are two different substances, but eating the one helps produce the other one. They have found that one of the strongest predictors of Western disease is now blood cholesterol. They didn't realize that. Now, you and I have heard for several years now that's a precursor to tell you if you're likely to have heart problems. Now, in the China study, they said they discovered that wherever they saw high cholesterol, you're going to see high levels of cancer, you're going to see high levels of diabetes, you're going to see high levels of arthritis, and all the inflammatory diseases as well. Dietary cholesterol is present in the food we eat and is only found in animal-based food. And it's the one that we find on the food labels when we look at cholesterol. As blood cholesterol levels in rural China rose in just certain counties, the incidence of Western diseases also increased. How interesting. The average level of blood cholesterol was only, are you ready, 127 in China. That was their average. Almost 100 points less than the American average of 215. Some counties in China had them as low as 94. Here they say that's unhealthy to be that low. Our low values are near the high values of rural China. Lower blood cholesterol levels are linked to lower rates of heart disease, cancer, and other Western diseases, even at levels far below those considered safe in the West. Most Americans know, again, that if you have high cholesterol, you should be concerned about heart disease and all the things with that. But they didn't realize it has anything to do with cancer, but it does. Several heart surgeons said that they never saw a heart disease fatality among any patients who have blood cholesterol readings below 150. That's pretty amazing, because that's all they do is deal with heart patients. And they said not one time have we seen heart disease with somebody with it lower than 150. Now, there's some interesting stats here about fat and breast cancer. On the average, we consume 35 to 40% of our total calories as fat. Wow, that's quite a bit. We've been consuming high-fat diets like this since the late 19th century. Because we have more money, we begin consuming more meat and dairy, which are relatively high in fat. Now, from the time I was a little girl, you heard eat your animal protein, drink lots of milk for strong bones and strong teeth. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. We were demonstrating our affluence by consuming such foods, because there was a day people didn't have much money for meat. So once the country started to get richer, that's how we show that, boy, we've really moved up. We can eat lots of meat now. And that was the generation most of us were raised in. The correlation between fat intake and animal protein intake is more than 90%. This means that fat intake increases in parallel with animal-based food in the diet. The late Ken Carroll, a professor of the University of Western Ontario in Canada, has shown findings that there is a very impressive relationship between dietary fat and breast cancer. This is very important because that has reached terrible proportions in this nation. Again, studies have shown that only 2 to 3% of all cancers can be attributed to genes. Funny how we're putting so much emphasis on that, and even the new shots that come out get tested to see if you have the gene. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have any of those, but that's where the money is going, that's where the research is going, that's where the advertisement and emphasis is going, when we're talking about probably 2 to 3% of anything has to do with genetics, where nobody's doing the research that much on the fat correlations and hormone correlations. Information certainly suggests that we can lower our rate of breast cancer to almost zero if we make perfect lifestyle choices. Studies have shown that breast cancer was associated with animal fat intake, but not with plant fat. I have known of people that went on the Atkins diet and all these heavy animal protein and lots of fat that ended up right afterwards being diagnosed with breast cancer. Folks, there's a correlation with these things. The China study showed that higher dietary fat is associated with higher blood cholesterol, and both of these factors, along with higher female hormone levels, are associated in turn with more breast cancer and with the early age of maturity for females. And you know what I'm talking about, everything that goes with that, menstruation, everything. That has to do with how many hormones that these young girls are being fed in the cow's milk, in the animal meat, all of that. Higher fat consumption is associated with higher levels of estrogen during the critical years of 35 to 45, and higher blood levels of the female hormone prolactin during the later years of 55 to 64. These hormones are highly correlated with animal protein intake and milk and meat. Diet and disease factors such as animal protein consumption of breast cancer incidence leads to changes in the concentrations of certain chemicals in our blood. These are called biomarkers. And I could tell you more about biomarkers, but we don't want to get that detailed in what we're trying to do here. But there are countless studies and proofs of these things. You will find this, I believe, extremely interesting about osteoporosis. When I started reading this stuff, I went, whoa. And maybe it interested me more because my grandmother is of a very tiny frame and ended up with it. My mother, a very tiny frame, and ended up with it. So of course, when you talk about the genetic factor, and when I get this weight off, you will see that I have a very tiny frame, and they say tiny frame women are more inclined and all that. But listen to this. So I start taking calcium. Like that's because you keep hearing about that so much. Listen to this. We talk about drinking dairy and milk, and it'll take care of all of our osteoarthritis problems and our osteoporosis and all that. Did you know the rate in this nation, in the United States, is much higher than the countries that don't eat meat or drink nearly as much dairy as we do. Now that's kind of weird. If that's what we need to keep bones strong, we should have the lowest incidence of anybody in the world. The problem is not calcium consumption, but all of the acidic meat products and fat that we take in. Because what you don't realize, my friend, is the more acidic the body is, the more the body doesn't like to be in that state. It's a breeding ground for cancers and other diseases. So when you take in a lot of meat and take in a lot of acid, the body says, we've got to do something about that. We've got to make it more alkaline. So the fastest way it can do that is to leach calcium from the bones to try to make the body more of an alkaline environment. So the more meat and the more milk somebody's drinking, the more it's leaching out of the bones and producing exactly the opposite effect. Wow. Why aren't we being told all of this? Now, I've read you some costs, but listen to this. We pay more for our health care than any other country in the world. We spend over $1 trillion on health care just in 1997. People are expected to become sick at a younger age. It's not only our health suffering, but our pocketbooks, and we're bankrupting the healthcare system, and then not to mention all of the disability from it and the welfare system. They said that by 2030, health costs will be $16 trillion in this country. We now spend 1 out of every $7 the economy produces on health. 1 out of 7. That is staggering. It's a 300% increase in less than 40 years. And it's still not creating health, is the sad part. Other countries spend on average only about half of what the U.S. spends per capita on health care. So you'd think that ours would rank the best, but they did a study of 12 nations, and I'm not talking about third world nations. I'm talking about Western nations like Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe. And guess what? Our system was the worst of the 12 they studied. It ranked 37 best in the world according to the healthcare system performance. This is among all these other Western countries too. And then from 3 perspectives, disease, medical care efficiency, and economics, we have a deeply troubled medical system. In the U.S., we spend 50% of our $2 trillion healthcare budget taking care of people who are sick. While guess how much is spent preventing that? Less than 3%, and helping people stay healthy in the first place. On top of all that, the medications we're using to mask the symptoms and just kind of keep them at bay, all of those that are caused by excess weight and lack of exercise, all those meds are making us sicker yet. Now, I could tell you I've got a lot more here going back to the dairy industry, and let me just mention a couple more things that I did not cover. It's been found that 70% of the fracture rate is attributable to the consumption of animal protein. We have more hip fractures in this country than in the countries that drink almost no milk or eat no animal protein, and yet that is the marker they use for osteoporosis and all of this other bone health, is how many hip fractures you have. And so something we're being told is not adding up here. Now let's talk quickly about the importance of fiber. The late Professor Dennis Burkett of Trinity College in Dublin said that even though fiber was not digested, it is vital for good health. It's able to pull water from the body into the intestines to keep things moving along. They help gather up chemicals that find their way into our intestines that might be carcinogenic. If we don't consume enough of it, we're susceptible to constipation-based diseases and keeping all that poison in our body. This includes large bowel cancer, diverticulitis, hemorrhoids, varicose veins. And this fiber is only, let me say this again, only found in plant-based foods. There is not any fiber in animal foods at all. We digest very little or no fiber in this country. Those fibers have few or no calories in themselves, but they help dilute the caloric density of the rest of our diets. They create a sense of fullness. They help shut down appetite. It satisfies our hunger, minimizes the overconsumption of calories. There's a definite link between fiber intake and certain cancers. Also, high fiber intakes were associated with lower levels of blood cholesterol. That's why they say oatmeal and some of these things are always lower the cholesterol because you're getting some fiber in there. Good foods for this are beans, leafy vegetables, whole grains, all high in fiber. Now, the importance of antioxidants. Wow. We could go into the phytonutrients and all these other little words, but this isn't necessarily a nutrition course. This is Christ the Healer, where we're just trying to give you an overall view, and you can study some of these things out for yourself and ask the Lord and let Him talk to you by that sweet small voice of the Holy Ghost on the inside. The link between nicely colored vegetables and their exceptional health benefits has often been noted. Usually the brighter, the healthier they are. The colors of fruits and vegetables are derived from a variety of chemicals. Those are what is called antioxidants, in case you've ever wondered when you keep hearing that term. These chemicals are almost exclusively found in plants. They're only present in animal-based foods to the extent that the animals eat them and store a small amount in their tissues. They protect against cell damage. They protect from free radicals, those things that are happening as our cells are changing that can cause cancer and other things down the line. We've misunderstood. We've been fed a lie. I could spend 2 or 3 lessons just on this and don't have time. I'm so tired of hearing people say, well, does that have any carbs in it? We have been fed such a lie. Carbohydrates are the best thing for you. The problem is people have gotten so confused about simple, processed junk food carbs versus wonderful, complex carbs. And there's a big difference. Vegetables and grains are good, complex carbs. Our simple carbs that we're supposed to stay away from, potato chips and candy bars and candy and pastries and cakes and pies and the sugar beet and all of those things. Of course, that's junk. But fruits and vegetables are carbohydrates, and we need a whole lot of those dark green leafy ones, those bright orange ones, those berries that are nice and purple and blue and all of those. So carbs have gotten a bad rap, and because most of the carbs sold and eaten in the United States are junk carbs. That's why when people go, oh, I can't eat carbs, they suddenly quit eating all those pastries and chips and fries, and yes, get healthier and lose weight. But the problem is if you cut out all the rest of the carbs, that's where almost all your antioxidants are, your phytonutrients, and all of that. Now, one of the reasons for all of this problem is we've not been told the truth, and most people don't want to study it out, and most people don't want to take responsibility, and they'll just believe, well, if it's out there, our government must be protecting us. I'm sure they'd tell us if it's not good. Not true. We've got to create health. It's not just going to happen. We have a medical field which is geared to curing illness instead of creating health and well-being. And in our next session here, we're going to say just a couple of things about that and wrap all of this up for you. And hopefully this will be a new beginning for you and I. In Jesus' name. Now, in some later time, if I come back and film later, we may make a part 2 to this that talks about the emotional reasons we eat and how the Lord wants to free us of all those things. But right now, I believe this is giving you a good, healthy start. You can begin this program with me. We'll check in with each other and say, hey, I'm doing great. How are you doing? Have some people that will pray with you, believe God with you, that we can change these habits. And sometimes we've made a lifetime, 20, 30, 40, 50 years out of bad habits. Don't give up. If you fall down, say, no, I'm doing better all the time. This doesn't have to be all or nothing, perfection, or I go back to all my old ways. God, that's what your blood's for. Help me to do better and better every day. And Lord, I will help educate people and give testimonies how you have helped give me this knowledge and help me overcome a lifetime of disease and feeling cruddy every day of my life. In Jesus' name.